Cheers. Good morning.
What do you think of the nutmeg?
It's great.
Spicy.
It's a lot of it.
Is it? It's almost to hallucinogenic levels of nutmeg.
What kind of a trip does that entail?
The same. Apparently, it contains LSA.
Okay.
Which is the same. It's like a relative of LSD. I think it pretty much just does the same thing as LSD, except it's not super great for your liver, which is why people don't use, unless you're like desperate.
All I know of LSA is that I heard cats have a lot of it naturally occurring.
Huge ass pupils all the time.
Yeah.
I can see that, yeah. Apparently, Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds also contain LSA. And that sounds like an exotic plant that you'd have to go on a safari to obtain.
Yeah.
But really, it's not. You can actually get it.
Hawaiian baby rosewood seeds.
You can get it from Walmart, apparently. Apparently, you can buy the key to the universe from Walmart for $5.
You always could.
Yeah.
Live better.
It's just something that slipped through the cracks of the war on drugs through some sort of exclusive relationship with Walmart. They're like, we're just going to embed an Easter egg into like the consumer reality.
So is Walmart on its way out, or are they still holding strong?
No, I think Walmart is going to be fine.
Yeah?
Walmart's like the feeding trough.
That was a big deal for a moment. For like 5 years, the super Walmarts was...
There was a moral panic about super Walmarts.
Yes,
there was.
Yes.
I still partake of the moral panic about Walmarts, but I do it because it's funny. Like I do it because I feel like there's almost like I almost feel like sometimes I'm channeling Hunter S. Thompson when I think about Walmart, because it's like this animalistic reality where it's the human equivalent of like a stampede to a watering hole on Black Friday or something like that.
Sure.
There's like this like man as beast lens through which you can view like department stores.
I was stealing shit for a while.
Nice.
And
why is everybody I know a kleptomaniac? I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't steal shit.
I don't steal shit anymore.
Okay.
But I stole shit for a while.
Nice.
And I stole some MTG cards from there. That was one of my Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, right.
That was one of my more recent Walmart errands. And then they had a Miley Cyrus fashion line there, I remember. And I was able to buy a bright white hoodie, just blank, from the Miley Cyrus fashion line, and a girl's tee with a giant, like psychedelic Lisa Frank Bengal tiger on it, just taking up the whole front. And so I made a Bengal tiger hoodie out of Walmart Miley Cyrus fashion.
That's awesome.
It must have been 8 years ago, or 9 or 10 years ago. Yeah. I still have that hoodie.
Have I seen it before? Mm-mm. I don't think so. I feel like you have a lot of like tiger stuff. I've seen something of yours that has like a tiger on it.
My leg.
That's probably what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sure I'd have anything else with a tiger.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful tiger. The tattooist, the tattoo artist, that's what you call him.
The tattooing.
Yeah, the tattooing in Japanese was like, damn, I did good.
Oh, you got that? You got that in Japan? Mm-hmm. That's a cool place to get a tattoo.
Mm-hmm. I had to borrow about $200 from my friend, Travis, to make that tattoo happen. Because that was another thing I remember the tattooing doing, is laughing at me when I told him what price I was expecting it to be.
He's just like, huh. How much did it end up costing, the whole thing?
$500.
$500.
It's actually really good.
I mean, if for something you're gonna have
by today's standards. It's really good.
For something you're gonna have like the rest, fucking sirens. I don't know if it's gonna come out on the audio.
Oh, it will.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for something you're gonna have for the rest of your life, $500 is not a. It's almost like you wouldn't want things that were permanent decisions to cost less, because might remove like a very important degree of friction to that decision-making process.
It's an insurance policy, I think, to have some skin in the game.
Yeah. Pun intended. I can tell by your reaction that you didn't. I'm going to give your unconscious credit, or your subconscious credit for making that pun, I should say.
No puns of mine are ever intended.
I don't think people's conscious mind is in a position to say whether or not puns were intended. What? Because maybe you don't like. How do you know if you didn't?
No, you know when they're intended.
Well, I'm getting into sort of, I don't know.
Because the dad's puns are, that's part of that's part of the art form. Is if you can intend the pun more fiercely, then that like buoys how bad the pun is.
Have you ever taken a credit for a pun a split second after you accidentally made it?
No.
Because I have. But then I just give...
Maybe, yeah.
But then I give credit to I just think, well, my subconscious was on it, and there was a slight lag in me realizing certain word choices. I really think so. Like, I think if you're really... The part of being able to say things that are, like, funny or witty or, like, being in comedy or something like is, like, the ability to surprise yourself and have a kind of like unconscious in the driver's seat way of talking. And the reason I'm thinking about this probably is because we went to Gnarly Deli a few days ago, and they had like comedy night.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this place? You remember that like Gen Z dance place that used to be by the Chinese restaurant down underground in downtown Chico?
Basement.
The basement, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is now apparently like Home on the Range or something in a weird...
No, that's different buildings.
I know different buildings, but it's like they moved...
Oh, where the EDM is now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. They shifted spiritually to that, or they're trying, or whatever. Anyways, that's a tangent. But anyways, this Gnarly Deli had like a comedy night, and there was like amateur open mic stuff, and it was pretty cringy.
Yes.
I'm not going to say I could have done better, because I don't know, I've never tried, but... I was just observing. I felt like I was like judging the shit out of this guy, like
sure,
because it was just like all this like nervous laughter and like like you know what I'm saying? Those kind of phrases that are like the little like and like like almost like acting like you're like on like nitrous oxide or something. Just be like to the microphone, just like all his, every other word.
Maybe you could make a comedy routine out of just making those.
Oh, actually,
only those noises and you know what I mean phrases.
Just walk up on stage, be totally silent, and then just go. Yeah. Actually, that would be funny.
Yeah.
You know why? Because it's real. Because it's actually what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could get in touch with the weirdest part of yourself, and at every exact moment, comedy would write itself, because the whole point of a comedy is just to bare your soul. Words are just like a sort of a prop to do that.
That makes me think of a guest on Joe Rogan. I told you about it once I listened to it. I don't remember his name anymore. He's Asian. I don't know which kind of Asian.
Wait, was it the Korean guy who was like in Africa going after like...
Yeah.
That guy?
Yeah.
That dude was insane, yeah. I remember that guy.
It's like David Cho.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's at least the correct number of syllables.
Something like that.
But he said that he recorded a podcast completely with nonsense noises.
Yeah.
And and went for about 2 or 3 hours of making nonsense noise content. And
that's just real.
That's pretty great.
It's more real than
it's really meta.
It's a lot more real than like the podcast released by NPR.
Right. Yeah.
That's just like a non-involved person like reading headlines.
Or comedians trying to make a shitty podcast, and it just amounts to a whole bunch of, you know what I mean, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is having a podcast considered or is it something that's like you're supposed to do if you're an aspiring comedian? Is that the medium du jour?
It was for a moment, yeah. I don't even know what the state of podcast is now. Like, it could be totally dead at this point. I wouldn't know.
Yeah,
our pod is just getting better and better. Not the listenership maybe, but the quality is getting better and better.
Absolutely. The actual, the product is getting way better. I feel like there was a big.
But I do not know if it's like if it's a boom or a bubble or a burst bubble at this point.
I think it's harder and harder to. I think it's getting harder to form a objective picture of the media ecosystem because there's no one who has the incentives to actually do that. Whereas it's almost like it's a return to the pre-Google.
Oh, we've never had to like new forms of measurement are required. New like ways to organize the data. Is easier to get a grasp on what media was doing when you could like see the whole landscape in front of you, but now it's too big.
Well, we don't
know how to measure it.
What's interesting is that I think it's that so we don't know how to measure it, but I'll add the caveat that we don't know how to measure it specifically because we don't know how to incentivize people to measure it. We haven't figured out how to set up incentives for people to measure it in a way that leads to people putting a lot of effort to actually measuring it. And I'm imagining, like, thinking about, like, pre-Google world, if you wanted to know, like, imagine in some sort of alternative timeline there was podcasts before Google was a thing. Don't worry about the unlikeliness of that, but I'll use a different example. Like, let's say, like, pre-Google, if you wanted to know, like, how popular some, new thing was, well, who are you going to ask? I guess you're going to probably look to critics, maybe? Or you're going to go, well, how much is this getting a lot of, are they talking about it on TV?
That's right.
That used to be the thing that was, are they playing it on the radio? So it was this, but unless you had like an overview, like you were some executive at like a media company, you didn't have any, very few people had objective numbers on, there was this famous interview of like this guy who was talking to some like old school like Disney executive, and it was this conversation between the Disney executive and like some advertiser person who was like going to make like a huge ad buy, and he wanted him to give him like the numbers. He wanted him to give him like a dollar figure, and the Disney guy had this like almost like Magic Man kind of response that was like no, like don't spoil the magic kind of thing, which is there was like some truth to that part of the idea of like in a way, like making an ad buy for like in that type of like much more simple focused media culture, it was a way of like it was something similar to like putting the president's face on a bill of currency or something like that, where it's not really mechanistically the brand identity that you're not convincing people to buy your products. What you're doing is it's like a flex of saying that like, okay, based on the only mechanism to form consensus reality that we have, you're going to find our brand's visage imprinted upon this consensus object. And that was a very low bandwidth way of creating consensus about what popular culture was doing. And then Google came, and then for a brief moment, there was like the democratization of objective takes on like what was popular. And then, but the problem is though, is that while the reason why that was successful is because it was like Google made a way to organize. They succeeded pretty quickly actually in their original mission, which was to organize the world's information. But then they entered a kind of like a sort of like little bubble reality, post-modernity of their own creation of their own business model, where at some point it became more profitable to be an arbiter, a purveyor of narrative products than it did an objective reflection of some sort of like narrative elucidation mechanism. They shifted from elucidation to synthesis.
Well,
We have to figure out how to like re-incentivize people to actually tell the truth. Otherwise we won't get it.
I think Google does know the thing I just said we don't know. They do have all the analytics of what media is doing where, and they like muddy up that picture themselves by like trying to change the numbers by force, trying to force people into consuming certain kinds of media and not others. But behind closed doors, Google has all the data of how big subcultures are getting and shrinking.
Yeah, but I think the problem beyond that...
We just have no way of knowing anymore if any of that information that comes down to you when you ask for it is been tampered with or not.
Well, and beyond that even, part of the problem too is that decisions about what to highlight have a self-fulfilling kind of aspect to it. Like in the popular culture engine, if you any little tweak to the way that it works is going to move reality in that direction to where if you only looked at it from afterwards, you wouldn't be able to necessarily figure out what was cause and what was effect. I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but like SEO is a perfect example of Google's, the way Google works specifically is why it's very hard to find certain types of information online.
It's changed the way people title the movies they make.
Yeah.
It's changed the way people title their SoundCloud rap careers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean if we go McLuhan on that and say that the message is the medium, or the other way? The medium is the message.
Well, it's... Yeah, McLuhan. I need to read more of his stuff. He seems like someone who's influenced a pretty diverse number of people.
Yeah, all I know...
Marshall McLuhan?
All I know is Terrence loved riffing on him.
Yeah.
And where did my associations go there? This isn't McLuhan-y at all, I don't think, but I think next of how Terrence talks about looking at writing versus reading, and how putting things into typesets and getting a printing press stamped the human psyche with this homogeneity of thought. And before you were reading, you were looking at handwriting, and you had to be much more engaged in a translation process of a unique other person's personality that was coloring the way they were forming letters and stuff.
And they're like kind of idiosyncratic spelling conventions unique to them.
And you had to look at it to extract the meaning, as opposed, in Terrence's words, as opposed to reading, which is what we do now with the printing press and established typefaces.
Yeah.
And then that's intensified with Google, where spelling A, spelling B, Google is going to push you into the American way of spelling color if you try to use the British way of spelling color by going C-O-L-O-U-R. Google's going to try and push you away from that.
Speaking of...
and other grammatical things, like Google is now the arbiter of what grammar is supposed to be, because when you're writing, you're just trying to get rid of those blue underscores.
You know,
it puts.
You want to know something really? You want to know something that's kind of like that is going to probably blow your mind. So apparently, this was a few days ago. I was reading this on Hacker News. Google has actually deployed a new feature in Google Docs that underlines words that might be politically problematic with a squiggly purple line.
I've seen this headline once.
So if you type, for instance, landlord, it'll be like, maybe you should say property owner or something like that.
Now, is that a literal example?
Yeah.
Because like landlord is pretty innocent of a term.
Yeah, and that is a literal example.
Like what I first think of is if you use the N word, hard R, and then it like tries to veer you away from that social suicide. But landlord is much more insidious.
I don't think it would say anything
of a term to censor.
I think if you started typing the N word, there should be a dialogue box that pops up to where you have to upload a photo of yourself to prove that you're black, and then Google's machine learning will detect the percent of your blood which is black, and then
you're like a super vanilla black person, and you just have to hope your bone structure has enough.
That'd be. I think that's the best way to solve that problem. I think it's more like there's more like it's more like anodyne examples than that. It's just things that have. Basically, it's just an aspect of American cultural imperialism. It's like I imagine that, like, I don't know, people in the UK, like, for example, you use the word, like, this is a dumb example, but like the word fag means like a cigarette,
right?
So I think you'd have a hard time. Like, even if it was possible to come up with some sort of like localized, like you'd have to have a ministry of culture for every single subpopulation in the world. It's just completely unworkable. The idea that like a basic writing tool should start telling you how to speak. Like, if that's not a very concrete example of this inversion of like destiny, of like the machines becoming the masters.
These are necessary.
It's very suggestive of
These
that.
are necessary steps, though, because don't you want an AI ultimately that's gonna help you be more erudite?
I don't know.
And like,
I do not.
Assist you in writing your essays and novels and stuff?
I do not.
Or like assist you at all?
No. I wanted to get the fuck out of the way.
But an AI that was in good faith and in your court, it would just make you more productive. That's why we're using fucking cell phones right now.
My brain is the AI. I do not want an AI. I don't want any sort of. I want writing to be a one-way mirror. I want it to be I don't want the tool to speak back at me at all. Because I feel like that's limits.
But if it could help you get your ideas to the finish line faster and better than you could do by yourself, are you really going to say no to that?
I appreciate you're playing devil's advocate on this.
I don't think it's devil's advocate.
No?
I think it's inevitable. We're here using fucking cell phones. The Trojan horse is already behind the gates, man. If you get something that makes your life better by your terms, you're going to fucking use it.
But I don't think that in the spirit of what you were saying a few minutes ago about Terrence's ideas about looking at writing as opposed to reading it, there's, the typesetting. One way of looking at that is that it's kind of like a discretization, or like a creating almost like a digitization of writing, in a way that, like, if you had I'm thinking of like, I'm back to, I was looking at the original print copy of William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. I wanted to read the original. I didn't want to read like a transcript of it. So I looked up like the scanned images from the library of wherever it was, Oxford or some shit like that. And I was looking at it, and it was amazing because it was still legible. It was actually handwritten, but it was, or I think it was like, it was hand carved into a plate, but it was not done in like typeset. And you could still read it. And there was little parts where like he would run out of room on a line and have to make like little small letters, and this, you just have to deal with it because this is like a brass plate you've been like fucking with for like a month, and you're not going to start over because of that. So you make the best of it. But there's like these little imperfections that are in the text, and that flows seamlessly with the sort of illuminated sketches and watercolored marginalia adornments, embellishments that are so like the text and the images just like naturally flow together because there isn't any discrete line of like where the art stops and the textuality, like the like tell me what the Unicode representation of this is, like what's like the hash of this file. Kind of like that's the extreme end, is something like a hash function, which is down to the bit. There is a unique number which represents this exact digital artifact. That's like how far we've come. But in between there, I think that with writing, the reason I'm afraid that there's going to be a compression. There's going to be a loss of information if you have a writing tool suggest things to you, because presumably, okay, if you were the sole author and sole user of a writing tool for yourself, or there was a writing tool that only made suggestions that were entirely derived of the history of your own writing that you'd put into it, then I would think that'd be safe to use as an extension of yourself. However, if there was any copies of this artifact made and other people were using them, you might get into a situation where different inputs would be responded to in the same way, and so therefore there would be some slight loss of diversity, loss of information, and it might come with a trade-off. There might be a gain in efficiency or a gain in quality, but there'd be a compression function that would be at play in that overall system.
I'm just saying there's an ideal of an AI that just helps your identity express your you-ness, and on the way to that ideal, we're gonna troubleshoot these more dystopian, fucked up shit like what Google's doing now. And I guess we're pretty close to segueing into my Google Maps.
We should. I'll just say one closing thought on this thing. So, the AI tool, like in general, the idea of partnering with AI to accomplish
more than you could otherwise.
I think the only non-dystopian way for that to occur is for your relationship with AI to approximate your relationship with another distinct person. And you'd have to have a personal relationship with your AI. If you didn't have that, then it's not AI.
You'd have to be able to see eye to eye with your AI.
Yeah, well, sure. You have to have you have to realize there's a certain, like it's kind of like a collaboration, like a muse. A muse is another human. There's something important about the fact that the muse has an independent will that you can't just completely use as like a projector board, because that's not a good muse. If a muse doesn't have a kind of willfulness of their own accord, then it's not. I don't know. So I think that's what, ideally, the best AI is just going to end up something like Westworld, where it replicates with high fidelity what a human is, because that's what we're psychologically inclined to do. It's the reason why our technology already has this, like, these physical metaphors like book pages, and like we're just like there's a continuum of there's a millions and millions of years old embeddedness of the human form. Well, like, so okay, and I'm breaking the Elon Musk rule, but the whole, like, Tesla is making the humanoid robot thing. I think they're on the right track with that, because like it might seem impractical, like why not just make like a little like wheel, like a little R2D2 type thing. Well, because the world is not, also like our brains are not set up to relate.
Our brains aren't set up for it. Our world isn't set up for it. Our world is built around the human form.
If you think that God made man in his own image, then I think I said this last week, but you also have to take seriously the fact that the will to make God the will to make another being in one's own image is one of the aspects of God that if we really are made in God's image are also going to try to do.
Mm-hmm. It's a path of least resistance.
Well, yeah, and it's this infinite mirror thing. It's this fractal infinite mirror thing to where the will to make a copy of yourself is embedded not only in, obviously, DNA, but it's embedded in the metaphysical parallel to that. And it's funny how we're embedding. It's like we're making what we really want to do is create God, but actually we have to justify it in terms of productivity tools, because that's what our culture is focused on, and that's where we got the ability to even fuck with those tools in the first place was by focusing on the productivity. And so it's like, oh, look at all this like shiny. It's like you pick up the things you have and arrange them in a way you feel you should, and then tell a story to yourself about why you did that.
Yeah,
that's what I see happening with.
Well, that's what you're doing with yourself.
That's what I was thinking.
That's your explanation
I think
so
that
far
almost
for
anyone who
your actions.
Yeah, I think there's just a feeling I should be doing what I'm doing, and I am narrativizing it post facto why I'm doing it. I think a lot of people are doing that actually, and I think it's just better to be aware of that, because then you can dispense with a lot of work, and you're able to suspend justification for why you're doing things. Much like somebody said something to me one time, might have been you actually, I can't remember. No, I think it was something, I can't remember where I heard this. It was the idea, like, if you have a dream, it's better sometimes to just hold the dream in mind without trying to articulate it, so that it can gain power before you jump on it.
Right.
It's like if a kid, I don't know, I haven't much experience with children, but the limited experience with children is I've seen how, when they're learning to talk, how easy it is to become overexcited and just mess up their struggling attempts to speak. Be like, and they're like, oh, you said a word, like, oh my gosh, congratulations. The kid's just like, like, your bandwidth is a lot higher than me. I need to just like have a lot of space and like nodding to, this kind of thing. But do you want to get into your rant about this?
Let's get into it.
Okay, I'll do a review. Texted me the other day. He said, turned off my Google Maps after using it because otherwise they'd be seeing more of my day. But then I left it on because as long as someone is recording true events that happen in time, it's better than no one recording the specific truth. Until we have better ways of recording truth. Truth as one of three expressions of God. Truth, beauty, and goodness.
The three expressions of God.
Adding to the Akashic record of facts, adding to the expression of God. And I'm stoned. Fact. So-and-so drove here to here, or so-and-so drove here to here on so-and-so day of history. I created that one. Now I understand Yang's UBI. That's what I didn't understand the leap. What does that have to do with Yang's UBI?
I kept going, didn't I?
Google, okay, all right, yeah, sorry. It's pending, okay. Google gets all the value of that fact creation I did until we have better methods. So,
I made that fact. I drove from here to here on so-and-so of a day. I created a truth. Is that a valuable thing that I created that?
Oh, is this like
Google thinks so.
Well,
so they recorded that fact and they are keeping it somewhere.
It may or may not be valuable.
I think the proof is in the pudding that it is valuable.
Well, what's the pudding?
How big Google is, how much money they make,
sure.
how much power they wield.
There's definitely a subset of facts that are a lot more useful than others. I mean, I could dress up in a monkey costume and sit at a typewriter and pound on the keyboard for 8 hours and write a novel and publish it, and I don't think that's very valuable.
You could put the right nets around that event and record different kinds of that truth, and now it's a fun YouTube video.
Yeah.
There's ways.
Sure, but that's you're defeating my thought experiment. by let's say that
Okay, but
you get what I'm saying. There's certain types of information that are less.
of course there are more powerful facts
Right.
and less powerful facts, but I'm defaulting on just basically making more facts is just engaging in the work of articulating the body of God with more and more and more and more and more of your actions. And so the fact of driving from here to here on a day, the world is a more full, diversified, detailed place if that fact gets indelibly recorded somewhere.
Yeah.
And so until we have a better until we democratize Google, it's better for Google to be recording all that shit.
Well, we hope that it's taken a bit of a bet. I think that having that data set, allowing that data set to exist, is a huge liability. And I sort of look at it similar to like nuclear disarmament treaties, that the goal of nuclear disarmament treaties is to reduce over time bilaterally, or I suppose now trilaterally, the possibility for worldwide destruction by by recognizing that like the fact that these bombs that can destroy cities exist is something that doesn't bode well for the future of humanity. I look at something similar of like, I look at the existence of a data set that has recorded the vast majority of people who live in first world, smartphone having people's movements on a meter level accuracy for the last 10 years. I think that the existence of that data set is too dangerous and it should be like deleted. Or I don't know if that's possible.
Just because of what bad actors can leverage that information to do?
Yeah, because you could come up with, and I wouldn't be surprised if it already has. I think if it hasn't been leveraged yet for bad acting, I think the only reason it hasn't been is out of the incompetence of the people who would try to leverage it for bad reasons. But I think you could predict a tremendous amount about what would happen if the world, it happens in the world in seemingly unrelated domains, just by having that fine grain and integrated of a data set, because that data set contains signals about a lot of other things that no one even knows.
But this is a way different metaphor than nuclear disarmament, because these things can be used to expand consciousness. Someone breaks into the Google hard drives, gets all that data, gives it to everyone, and we just have all that information now.
Yeah.
And now good actors and bad actors alike can use the information.
That's probably the only realistic way to deal with it, is make it completely open, because you're never going to delete every copy.
It's more neutral than a nuclear bomb, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
And I fall
That's a good point.
I fall on the other side from what you just, which side you picked, where I think more is better. More humans is better than less humans. More truth is better than less truth. Just the recorded truth of how things went down. We have more of that than ever before. There's less to just chalk up to memory, chalk up to an eyewitness who's going to remember it like based on how their hormones are running through their body that day.
Yeah.
Like, we have the facts. We just have more facts than ever before. That's a basic good thing, is what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. I'm connecting to this thing that I can't remember if it was an X-Files episode or some kind of sci-fi scenario, but the idea was that there was some kind of like, it was like this historical fiction sci-fi thing where sometime in Jesus's life, in like Lazarus's tomb or something like that, archaeologists discovered that there was this ceramic vessel that had been painted that was drying while conversations and events were happening like thousands of years ago, and that the sound waves impacting on the drying paint left this microscopic, indelible, almost like audio etching of sound waves. And so by analyzing with an electron microscope the
grooves in the paint.
the sort of like variations in the way the paint dried, you could extract a signal. And then so that's that was, I don't know if that's accurate. Something like that is in principle probably accurate. I mean, there was a
well, it's pure sci-fi to me how you can even put sound onto a vinyl record. That like blows my mind.
Yeah, it's actually pretty. It's
physical grooves in vinyl.
It's analog in the sense that
amazing.
there's an analogy between the shape of a compressional wave in sound and like a transverse wave on a vinyl medium. It's just the fact. It owes to the fact that waves, that geometry is a universal substrate. That's why you can do that.
Yeah.
But as far as the paint drying thing, that's just kind of like this speculative scenario. But
okay, well, you added to my point, I think, with the Jesus sci-fi Lazarus's tomb anecdote, because now the people millennia from now are gonna wish they had all these facts about the way this culture at this time lived.
Right.
They're gonna wish they had that information. The way we wish we had all the living, breathing info of what Jesus times.
Well, part two of this anecdote is where I introduce a fly into the ointment, though. Which is, this is a hypothetical fly, so it's not too alarming. But I actually think it's like potentially somewhat liberating because. Anyways, whatever. Okay, so the Akashic Records, the idea that there is this indelible record of all past reality embedded in the present, that is a compelling idea, but if you look into it a little more, I think that what you would find is that there is a natural limit on how much information can be recovered due to the fact that there might not be enough computational resources in the universe that could be utilized fast enough to recover all the information that was created. So, like, let's take this drying paint thing to the extreme scenario where we go like, okay, we're not limited anymore by like these fortuitous situations in the past when there was like some drying paint or something. We can literally just look at every atom in a space, in a room. We can every atom, and we can measure the position and velocity, and we can just turn back the clock with math to be able to
read the atom.
Yeah, be able to like go a little zoom in like to like 3000 BC, California. What was happening there? Yeah. Oh, it was an empty field. Okay, and we can see the waving pieces of grass. Exactly how the simulation. Okay, so the trouble with that is that presumably you have some massive computer, some massive machine that is able to model with perfect fidelity the past. Okay, now here's the problem. The present now contains part of the indelible present, which is soon to be the past, metaphorically. Part of the indelible present is this perfect representation of the past. And so what you're doing is you're exponentially multiplying the past. But what you're saying, if you're saying that it's possible to create an indelible record of the past in the present, then that is logically equivalent to say that there is no more informational content than there ever has been, that you haven't gained anything. So that is almost like a reductio ad absurdum, that you can't do that. There's computational limits to how much you can map one-to-one a point in the past and a point in the present. So like, and this is like, making me think of like a hash function. If you take a hash function, you take some very large piece of data, you can run it through an algorithm that boils that data down to a fingerprint, which is 40 bytes long. And the chances is you're never going to find a piece of data, again, that boils down to that exact same string, that exact same sequence of characters. But logically, the fact is that every single hash that you find of any piece of data has not only one or two or three, but infinite duplicates. There's an infinitely large set of data that maps to the same hash. because there is no constraint on how big that data can be. So you could just imagine a data set that it's like a billion times larger. So, but the problem is that's an abstract idea. In the actual universe, the size of the data set is limited by energy.
Okay, well, the way I'm grappling with all that shit is if you look up information in this very infinitely high resolution Akashic records, there is a limit on what you get on the picture you get back. The limit is the question you think to ask about that moment in time. If you're asking what the crops of this plant are doing in this point of history, you're not going to get back the information of what the clouds were doing, of the plague of locusts that happened 6 months before, because you just didn't think to ask any of those innumerable questions that would show up the infinite high fidelity of that historical moment. Consciousness imprinting the information, you can't get away from that. The historians writing history, you only get answers to the questions you think to ask.
And the way in which you ask the question contaminates. This is the fly in the ointment. It contaminates the.
Well, it creates new information
faster than you can elucidate. Yeah, and you're having a negative. You're losing ground if you start asking too close of questions. And like there's another thought experiment. I am agreeing with you. Another thought experiment that you can use to sort of imagine that is, like if you're trying to perfectly model what the weather is going to do, you might be like, well, if you just put like a weather station in every city, we'll be able to like measure the wind speed and direction and temperature and humidity, and like then we'll have a computer that's going to predict what the clouds are going to do, right? But then like, oh, sometimes we're wrong. Well, why were you wrong? Well, you don't have perfect resolution. You only have a weather station in every city. So why don't we create a weather station in every single house? Okay, you're going to get better accuracy, but still sometimes you're not accounting for the air molecules in between your weather stations. Okay, so then what we're going to do is create a swarm of a trillion nanobots that are going to fill the sky and measure every single atom. Okay, so you know what? Here's the thing. You might think like, well, now we're going to solve, the weatherman's never going to be wrong. No, he is still going to be wrong. You know why? Because that swarm of nanobots is now part of the system you have to measure, because that's definitely going to affect the amount of like sunlight that's getting down. See what I'm saying? And I think that little thought experiment of how your absurd measurement specificity fucking up the thing you're trying to measure, I don't think that is just a thought experiment. I think that speaks to a very objective truth about how nature works, is that when nature is not able in principle to know what's going to happen without fucking things up, that is a fundamental physical truth that is it's like nature's way of black boxing itself into a finite reality, so that things don't just blow out of proportion constantly. Okay, well,
I'm detecting your own native predisposition of black boxing things, so that you can stay focused.
Sure, but my mind is part of nature, isn't it? It's a system that's trying to figure out the future.
But what's the point of all that? I still think it's better to try to have more objective information about things. I want more facts. I think it's good that we know more about traffic patterns now. Like, it's a potential good. It requires someone asking some crazy fucking question, and then the random chaos of traffic data assembles itself into a new understanding about humans. So it's only like potential, but more facts better. What's the point you're driving at? That we just shouldn't try? We shouldn't try to predict things? We shouldn't try to get better information about how things went down and how things are going down?
No, not at all. I don't want any of this to be construed as a saying that we shouldn't try to maximize creation and organization of information. I think we absolutely have to, but we don't really have a choice in the matter. It's happening no matter what, and it's just, it has to be in a way that doesn't end up releasing like floods of information on the world unpredictably. Because
why? We're already there. We're already sailing in a flood of information that's completely unaccountable.
I think that
we're being assailed with radiation from who knows how many stars.
I just think that information should be made as liquid as possible. From a if in terms of like a societal project, okay, this is not talking about individuals. It's not talking about, because this goes directly against what we talked about earlier, which was the idea of like, to create things, you need to create kind of secret contexts in which things can develop.
Closed doors.
Yeah, you can't just like
ideas.
The first time you think of some new idea, just start like
tweet it.
I'm like, hi TikTok. So a thought just popped into my brain. Like, what do you think? Okay, you wouldn't accomplish much if you did that. Or what you would accomplish is precisely that. Actually, you'd eliminate it. So, but in terms of like, a media landscape, I'm thinking of something like the ideal of this is like democracy. Like, like law, the idea that like if you could have like a secret law, like this is what was so fucked up about like the when Snowden released all those documents about how like the government's surveillance program is perfectly legal. Well, how do they know? Well, the court told them. But why doesn't anyone else know about that? Well, the decision was secret. Also, the law on which it was based was secret. But don't worry, it's still a law. Like, okay, if it's a secret, it's not a law. There's something, because a law by definition is like a product of a democratic system, which is by definition a public thing. So in terms of like the unpredictable information example of like the sort of deleterious effects of such things would be probably like, well, like Google's like language 1984 Newspeak suggestion tool is it's some people for unknown reasons deliberated and figured out that this word was good and this word was bad, and then they just flip a switch, and the next thing you know, 1 billion people in India who are just learning the English language and don't know the fuck is going on in America, don't know what our cultural fixations on certain words are at the moment, are just decide to just that's how it must be the right grammar or something. I don't know what this purpley squiggle line is, and then like it creates this, and then what that ends up doing is it starts debasing language to where previously there was 4 or 5 different specific terms. Like there's a difference between a landlord and a landlady and a property owner and a property manager and a mob boss and a like a
slumlord.
And there's all these different little shades, and like yes, there's different shades because the reality of the human world, reality of the world is offensive. There's offensive aspects to the world, and it's really good that we have language that maps onto all those cases so that we can grapple with the world effectively. And I know I'm getting into a specific indictment of this crap right now, but
okay, well,
to your general point, I think it's good to spread information as far as possible.
And I think it's good to create as much information as possible that is based on truth as closely as possible. I think it opens up Pandora's boxes that are very dangerous and very dystopian, but that's just reality. Reality happening makes you responsible for making reality better, or it'll get worse. That's never not been the case. So Google recording all this shit and keeping it behind their closed doors, that gives us a responsibility to figure out how we're gonna make our own closed doors and create that fidelity of information ourselves without needing Google. Like, we have new responsibilities we didn't have before, but until we get there, it's better that someone's recording it and better than no one recording it. And I do see personally that I'm looking at this with hippie new age woo-woo beliefs of, well, I think the Akashic records are a real thing, and I just like to see it be physically expressed. Like, things get physically expressed bad before they get physically expressed good. I'm just glad to see it happening.
Yeah.
And I have that, what I've referred to as like a Christian level of optimism about the human race and where we're going, where
See, it depends on what version of Christian you ask, though.
right. Where I think I don't really see any systems as closed, or I don't really believe in closed systems. I don't think information can ultimately be held in secret. The truth will out always, and so Google can try to keep all the information they've helped record to themselves, but it's not going to work, because underneath the fabric of what we can see, there is a one race mind operating, and there's a mystique. This is my hippie beliefs, that like underneath the surface of unique consciousnesses, everyone is trading all information with everyone else in the unconscious, and so there's a sort of mycelial immune system against against bad actors using these new powers we have to wipe us out.
Yeah, the mycelium's always going to win. Always.
Yeah, and I think there is a metaphorical mycelium in Jung's collective unconscious, and that's a living fabric that does just allow certain things to happen because it helps the human organism grow, and it just doesn't allow other things to happen because that would annihilate the organism.
Yeah. What's really, I mean, you can look at, like, culture has never been more, has never had its own agency in the same way that it does now.
Right.
I'm thinking of this, people have said, like, it's like some sort of, like, neo-Marxist thing or something where, you know, you say, or maybe I think it was OG Marxism. It's like the idea that capital has a mind of its own.
Uh-huh.
Which I think is true, but I don't think it's bad.
Uh-huh.
I think it potentially is, but it's sort of like how fire has a mind of its own too. Mm-hmm. It's because any sort of positive feedback system has a mind of its own. It's unpredictable. It's powerful, right? So the idea being that if some aliens came in the middle of the night and buried a treasure chest full of gold in someone randomly just somewhere, that is introducing a potential cataclysm in the future. Mm-hmm. Because somebody of unknown intentions might come upon that treasure chest. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're a good person and they'll use it to do something that benefits other people in the world, or maybe they'll use it to, like, I don't know, hire a gang of mercenaries and kill people. You know, the point is that source of power, that's the mind of capital, is this ability to potentiate whatever happenstance, mm-hmm. wherever it falls into.
Yeah.
And thinking of cultural capital, which before was a metaphor, but now it's more of a objective description of the system, because
it's more minded.
And it's more defined rigorously. It's more defined in a way that balances are defined on spreadsheets of actual money, or money, government currency that we refer to as money. Cultural capital has more money-like functions now, where there's a much more cleaner. This is like the typesetting thing almost. Like, there's a much more cleaner social media. MySpace gave way to Facebook, which gave way to whatever it is now. The Post, the LinkedIn VR bubble reality. I don't know what was going on in that universe, but mm-hmm. social media has become more and more like the avatars have become more typeset in the world. Like, people look at all the different. There's fewer and fewer lanes that more and more people are being funneled into. Mm-hmm. People are in general more closely stamped with. Or people's opinions have become more correlated. Mm-hmm, the perfect example, where like if like in the past there may have been a certain correlation between lesbianism and environmentalism.
Okay,
but I would bet anything that there's a stronger correlation now. I bet there's a stronger correlation.
Because AI has helped group those things.
Because people who are on the spaces of the internet where you talk about lesbian stuff are more exposed to people who have a more of an overlap of people who are in their similar age range, and it's the same thing with like this is like almost at this point like a cliche criticism of like social media echo chambers. Like it's such a cliche that it's reached the levels of government bureaucracy who are talking about this now. Yeah. So it's not important anymore. There's something more going on than that. But
okay, so you're pointing to that there was more subtlety before everything was recorded and social media grouped into things that were easy to advertise to. You're saying there was more subtlety, more diversity of subcultures.
Yeah, and then now what's happening is a kind of like financialization of cultural capital, where the cultural capital is becoming more. The utility is not how it can be applied, what it does to the actual base level reality. Like it's more of like being used as this object of consensus to play this abstract shell game to convert it back into monetary, like actual capital.
I do think it's sick though. It's more subtle aspects of the psyche becoming more real than they were before. The evidence of them becoming more real is that they're able to be targeted and organized and used to generate ad revenue. These aspects and quirks of the human psyche. There's a necessary homogeneity of culture as a result, because we aren't very subtle in our imagination of what a human being is capable of, so that's reflected in the categories a programmer thinks to make of different cultures that come together. But it's like the difference between a thought that you have and never say and a thought that you have and then say. One is more real than the other. These weird quirks of like cultures and peoples and things that group together, like lesbians drive Subarus.
Yeah. Oh, there actually is a really good reason for that. There's a lot of lore about that, though.
I'm sure there is.
Okay, did you know that the Subaru logo...
I'm not finished yet, though.
It's the Seven Sisters. It's the constellation.
It's the Pleiades.
Yeah, yes. They're lesbians up in the sky, and that's why it's the car that lesbians drive. And you can fit merchandise from Home Depot in the back. All right.
But...
There's too many connections to ignore.
So that's like it's at this point in history, it's like a grossly simplified association. Like lesbians drive Subarus. Ha ha ha. That's funny.
I just want to say I love that. I love that. I just love that there is a strong correlation and a strong inexplicable correlation.
I don't like it.
Why? I love that.
I like being a lesbian is supposed to be like, it's supposed to be this individualistic quirk of a more strange singular person, and then I have to finish my thought. And now it's by this AI grouping of homogenizing culture, it's this like hive mind collectivist thing that like before you even think about what the implications for you as an individual are of being a lesbian, you already have your third outback. You haven't even paused to think about it because the algorithms have so effectively provided you with the car that's going to meet your needs.
Okay, I have to give you some lyrics from Cake that somehow seem really related to this. It's from the song "Short Skirt, Long Jacket."
I know what it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and this lady, she's got a short skirt, long jacket. She's touring the facility, picking up the slack. You know, I don't know if you've heard this song, but there's a specific line that goes, "She's changing her name from Kitty to Karen. She's trading her MG for a white Chrysler LeBaron." Love that. Love that. Because it's like, it's just such an evocative image of like, the whole song is amazing.
It is.
You know Cake is from Sacramento?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like that's why I feel like so many of their songs are like, they're like really like a NorCal band. They capture the vibe of NorCal is in some ways.
To an extent, yes.
Yeah, sorry,
yes.
that was a total fucking tangent.
I don't want to get into Cake.
Okay, yeah, let's not. Yeah.
I have too much to say about Cake, and it's mostly bad.
Oh man.
So, do you jive where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Though, with a thought that isn't said, isn't real by some standard, and it's not real until you say it. But then, like, there's a hierarchy of reality more real than that, of putting your actions to what you then thought and then said. And expressing these things with our algorithms and being able to capitalistically leverage them is making these different nuances of culture that were just subterranean and invisible, bringing them to light and making them real. That's just a basically good thing for things that were less real to become more real. There's a necessary maturation process where the things about culture that we're able to make real get like funneled and grossly simplified and hugely homogenized, and we have this gross like internet culture that is completely incapable of making high budget quality movies, for example. Like that's a growth thing, like that's a maturation thing, and we'll figure it out later on down the line. But it's better to like stamp these things in the forms of physical reality, so that because then that generates more invisible subcultures that no one's been able to really put words to before, that couldn't have ever existed until we like expressed the last batch of weird invisible subcultures.
Well, it's a journey from the subjective, from the purely subjective, which is like the point that is located at the center of your witness point, or wherever, the theoretical, like where you are is like theoretically the point of maximum subjectivity. Yeah. And then concentrically, the more you are able to articulate things, it moves out of you into the world, and something is lost in that, and something is gained, and something is gained, and it's a transition from it's like the rendition of the subjective into the objective, and there is a kind of creative destruction or destructive creation that happens in that process of articulation. So I think the domain of capitalism is in the objective articulated objects of the world. It is. Money being the invention of an objectification of will. Yeah. Money being this way to computationally allocate resources by creating units of desire and value. It's a way of encoding. It's an encoding scheme for society. That is in the same way that numbers is a formalistic like a way of encoding physics in a way that we can manipulate it symbolically to make predictions. That's what capitalism is doing, is the modeling engine for society. That is, it turns out, is way more effective than just asking the priest dude what the future is going to be. So that's why capitalism has won the game. But I think what's going on now is that the virus of capitalism is in some sense jumping ship into culture because it knows that, because it can see the future, being a modeling engine, it knows that certain ways of representing value are on the way out,
Yeah.
It senses the debasement of fiat currency. It knows that the real power of the world, and when I say knows, I'm talking about knows in the Darwinian sense of the word. Knows in the same way that ecosystems know, or populations can adapt to changing environmental conditions. That's the ecological sense in which I'm not ascribing some type of like teleological agency.
It's just like a fungal bloom
Exactly.
of the effects that we call capitalism are blooming in brand new, more resilient areas.
It's not only reacting, it's also proactively modeling the future and reacting to its modeled image of the future.
Well, the fungus digests its food before it consumes it.
Yeah. Right, and so we have capitalism jumping ship into things like memes. That's a strange thing, right? Isn't that weird that like a certain dog is like $1 billion dog? That's weird. Well, that probably doesn't mean anything. That was just a kind of a one-off. What a weird little thing that happened. Okay, I hope that doesn't like presage any large changes in the way capital is represented. So that's a silly example, but also you see cults of personality. Profound. And cults of personality are on the way back. You can't win political office anymore unless you have a big personality. If you want to be successful in the government, well, you got to become a YouTuber now. Not literally, but basically, you got to become. And so what that shows you is there's a shift away from these abstract mechanisms of capital representation to much more high-res methods of capital representation, like personality, which, like I think I said this before, but like monarchs are NFTs. They always have been. NFTs are not a new thing. It's just that we're representing NFTs digitally now, and so they seem new, but they're not. Caesar's face stamped on a fucking piece of metal is an NFT, and every little piece of coin is like a tokenization of that NFT's basic capital. Yeah. So we just have a new medium in which to define capital, and capital is not waiting for us to do it. It's just like jumping on it, and it's kind of remaking the world in its own image in the same way that it did before, when you had the printing press unleashed on Europe, and you had the ability to create corporations, legal abstract bodies that were that needed like a certain level of interconnectedness with telegraphs and letters and stuff like that to be able to represent themselves. But once they were, then they could reach back down to the physical world and start fucking with things and remake the whole surface of the planet.
And then that's the theory of AGI and how that's going to happen. We'll have enough
certain critical threshold.
We'll have enough nodes communicating at a high enough bandwidth that a higher dimensional kind of body can finally like thrive and start enacting its will on things.
I think we absolutely will see the internet turn into a very ecological environment. That's what Web3 is ultimately going to do. Is it's going to create this abstract space that is this abstract ecology of information, which is, if I had to predict, I would say it's going to behave a lot like what we think of as a biological ecosystem, where a biological ecosystem is just an abstract space. Physics is an abstract space, and there's a currency called energy, and there's a set of rules called chemistry. And biology is the economy of basically the market. It's a market for energy. So we're going to see a market for culture develop, where you have to reproduce yourself by whatever means necessary, and you have to survive by whatever means necessary. And there's no longer going to be any sort of there's going to be zero political enfranchisement for arbiters of culture. There's going to be no such thing. There's going to be one single arbiter of culture, and that is how much you can convince people to repeat the ideas that you're putting into their head. And there's going to be extreme competition for that. And we're already sensing that. And that's why governments of the world currently are recoiling at the power of the internet to put things into people's heads.
Yeah.
And there's this mad scramble right now to try to stem the fire hose somehow of like, and so you get like these things like this vague disinformation, fake news.
Yeah.
Well, that's just transitioning from one domain of consensus to another. I bet it feels like it's like a mouse getting eaten by a hawk or something. That's probably not great from the perspective of the mouse. But without that kind of ecological conflict, you're going to be limited and ultimately kind of stagnant. And anyways, it's not even really like a question of what should happen. It's objectively a question of what will happen. There's no such thing, like, because the mouse itself, that mouse couldn't have existed without its ancestors being eaten by owls for millions and millions and millions of years. In some sense, its body is a distilled essence of all of the lessons learned of its entire chain of, even back to the point at which the owl and, they're both mammals, they had a common ancestor at some point. Yeah. So it's like the universal consciousness just forking itself for a second to create some information in the tension. Yeah. So, it's this...
That's cool.
We're all... there's a certain level of cooperation of a larger mission that all of this conflict is doing. Just like in your body, you have all these negative feedback homeostatic mechanisms that would seem antagonistic on a micro scale, but when you zoom out, you see that there's like this... there's this... I think there's actually a Birds song about this. Not this specifically, but there's this thing where like from a distance, and it's like they're talking about like being like looking at the earth, and they're like, just like there's like the Vietnam War, but also from a distance, Earth is just blue and green, and the birds are soaring, and it's like, okay, birds, lay off the acid.
Okay, so I want to transition.
All right. I support you.
My name will now be Alexa.
Alexa, ooh. Have you considered Alexandra?
No, I want to be bigger than Amazon's product.
Reclaim Alexa.
Yeah. Reclaim Alexa is going to be my hashtag or my title on Twitter.
It's the quixotic quests, the common destiny of all potentially transgender Alexes of the world. Amazon has done them a great disservice. The fuck were you thinking, Jeff Bezos? I wonder if in the future there's going to be laws about what you're allowed to name AIs. Like if you create like a fucking evil, shitty AI and then you name it something, that personality, it's like basically creating a new god.
Yeah.
Like
you don't name people Adolf Hitler.
Exactly. You can't name your child Satan.
Oh, you could.
In America, you probably can. Most places of the world, you can't name your child Satan.
Okay, so...
Whatever, sorry.
What I am contemplating the last 24 hours is questions of reality and examining the question anew of, okay, I'm taking it for granted that things are real. I guess I'm going super Kantian, at least until I get the full thought out.
Kant?
Yeah, Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
That, okay, senses, what the senses touch, reality, easy, self-evident. But I have an intuition that I'm grappling with that, okay, but the Platonic forms thing, I think there is something to that. I think there is a hierarchy of reality that gets more and more and more and more real. I think there's images, but then there's hyper images. And there's people, but there's also hyper people. And so I was trying to go, okay, there are higher standards of reality that would then filter out most people as not real. As what? As the behaviorist offshoots of circumstances. And free will hasn't even been achieved in that swirl of phenomenological effects yet. And so what's the ladder look like of becoming more real than you were? So one answer I came up with was, okay, a person that's more real reacts to reality by generating new realities. That seems like something you can put your finger on. Like, people who are doing that are more in the world and more in reality than people who are not doing that. And I don't have anywhere to go with that except just to say it all out loud and contemplate that, like, okay, maybe I do understand how people like Sam Harris can come to frankly disgusting conclusions that identity and free will is a myth, because they're looking at mostly people who are NPCs and act algorithmically. And actual free will, it is like Icarus flying towards the sun. It can burn you, and it's dangerous, and it's the fire of the gods to realize that the narrative is yours. Okay, I think that's...
Yeah, it's funny how Prometheus and Icarus have an interesting relationship. The only difference is one of them succeeded. And the way, you know what I mean? Like, one of them's a hero and the other is a cautionary tale. But like, why do we look at failed heroes as cautionary? Like, good job, good try, Icarus.
They're both cautionary tales, and that's slave control philosophy.
That basically that Prometheus is like, it's too dangerous for him to hold the power of the gods.
That's the ruling. Yeah. That's the ruling class.
Yeah, fuck that attitude.
Spreading stories that limit the democratization of free will.
Yeah. Don't play with fire. That's what that is. That's what that's saying. I think it's Icarus is... I don't know what's worse. Icarus, the myth of Icarus, or the myth of Prometheus? You know what I mean? What is more like... It's like saying that, like, don't try to attain power, otherwise, because then you're going to pay for it. Or don't try to attain power because then you'll succeed and then you'll really be in trouble.
Yeah, they're both flawed, bad stories in that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
They do not do what a story is meant to do, which is to inflame man to reach for the highest within him.
I mean, to the credit of humans, at least we came up with the myths of Prometheus and Icarus. You know what I mean?
Okay, so to the credit of those stories, we were noting things that happened.
Yeah.
Quite regularly.
Yeah.
We were quite innocently saying, fuck, this phenomenon keeps happening.
I think because we live in
But then the story does have to be iterated upon.
Yeah. We very often, like, in modern times, one of the main relationship we have with myths and fables is like some kind of moralism, some kind of message. But I think that there's also just kind of an objectification of the human experience writ large that is in myths that doesn't necessarily have to have a moral content, but is just saying, like, yeah, Icarus and Prometheus are archetypes in this reality, and we've seen examples of this.
But I think for the more real person, all those stories do have to have a moral content.
If you assume...
Because you have to personally project a direction of moral ascension, which necessarily organizes all stories to their ability to help that moral ascension or not.
You know what's funny? I've never actually thought of... I'm imagining if if I'm honest with myself, I have taken a moral stance on this. Not really Icarus. I never really thought about Icarus because I looked at that as just like a straight, like, basic cautionary fable. You know, that's basically just like the Scandinavian attitude of, like, tall poppy syndrome. It's this, like, thing that anywhere where you have, like, a peasant culture, you end up with, like, Icarus type myths. But the Prometheus thing, I don't know if I've ever looked at that as a cautionary tale. I always thought Prometheus was the good guy, and like, yeah, he lit things on fire. That's like, I hope that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, the idea of lighting the world on fire is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than the world being like just a swamp of stagnancy. Don't you want to like live in a time when history's like burning brightly? I do. Obviously, I don't think there's much of a choice. Like, McKenna was like super. He was like honestly kind of an accelerationist in some way before that was even a word. He was a person who was very Promethean, and it's making me think of his.
He was complicated because yes, but he was super Luddite, like at exactly the same time.
Almost like he took on that Ludditism as a way of like coping with his own insane desires to like transcend physical reality. We don't even need bodies. That's fucking Promethean, and he like knows that it's like, but like at the same time he's like against like, modern chemicals or something. Well, Terence McKenna was one of his contemporaries, Robert Anton Wilson, who I think he somehow collabed with the dude at some point or whatever. But Robert Anton Wilson has a book called Prometheus Rising.
Okay.
I don't know if you've been familiar with this book, but it's a fucking amazing book. It's a kind of a reinterpretation of Timothy Leary's 8-circuit model of consciousness. And to be completely honest, the circuits 1 through 5 make sense to me, but anything past that, I think it's into like this like psychedelic babble speak that I'm not really so sure about.
I would imagine it just gets into personal wish fulfillment.
It gets into some kind of like some kind of quantum entanglement. Like, look, Tim Leary, if you just want to like have sex with a lot of people, just do it.
And there will be sex for everyone.
Yeah, like, you don't have to like
free pizza.
You don't have to like
because we're ascended. We can all sleep in.
You don't need to reinvent like Atlantis to accomplish this. Just come on, like just. Yeah, but to the credit of this book though, it was basically talking about just basically like there's like a biological circuit, a territorial circuit. There's a mind rationalist Sam Harris circuit. Mm-hmm. There's the moralistic circuit, and then there's like the pleasures, like cannabis associated circuit. So there's a lot of resonance. There's a lot of truth in what's being portrayed here, but
You were talking about Prometheus Rising.
Yeah, that's what this Prometheus Rising is. It's talking about how humans have like this base level, like you can like it's really, he uses the term reality tunnel, that you might have like a Baptist preacher who's in a certain reality tunnel, and then you have the Subaru driving blue-haired California lesbian who lives in Eureka, who's also in a reality tunnel. And if they ever met each other, it'd be like the wormholes just missed each other, to the extent that they weren't deeply in touch with themselves. Then, of course, there's a lot of common ground. But when they're trapped in this reality tunnel where they have a set of facts that is completely true, all your other facts of your world orient yourself around the story of like the idea of like Jesus, like the old-fashioned, just Jesus, no woo-woo shit, just actual church Jesus is like a big part of my life if you're a Southern Baptist, and so you're going to see that everywhere. It's like how people, the opposite would be like people who like everything is about climate change somehow.
That's right.
Or that everything is about trans people, or that everything is about QAnon, or everything is about Trump, or there's like these outsized images, outsized things that just have a way of bending all reality towards them.
And you're in a reality tunnel.
Yeah, and your reality tunnel becomes this thing. But Prometheus Rising is the idea that humans are, one by one, kind of like becoming meta to all their reality tunnels, to where there might be a person who's like, maybe Sam Harris wakes up one day and goes like, wow, I am a rationalist. Everything I have reasoned myself into a position where I think there is no free will. Gee, that's weird. And then just have like this almost like Zen Satori like kind of thing where you just go like, oh, that was this part of my brain. And And there's also the part of my brain that wants to like fuck. And there's also part of my brain that's like the political part of my brain. And there's like you can become like a loser by like getting fixated on any one of these little strands. And the idea is to like move up, presumably, the levels to where you get, like in the future, according to Tim Leary / Robert Anton Wilson, people in the future are going to take way more for granted. For example, like the stoned state of mind will become like way more of a base level social reality, and you won't need to smoke weed to get into that stoned state of mind. In the future, people just, I mean, honestly, people in California in 2022 would probably seem like they were on drugs constantly compared to people in 1850 in like the East Coast or something. So yeah, we're like walking around like, you know, even just like in our circle, like the fucking ridiculous ways that people act totally sober, which is completely normal to us, is some hippie shit. And you can't blame it on drugs. Drugs just modulate your social reality. They don't actually have anything to do with creating it. It just removes certain little bricks from the construct so that it goes into a different shape temporarily. But it, like, you could imagine a cultural construction where like acting like you're on drugs constantly is normal, and if you're not doing that, people are like, are you depressed? You know, here, have some more. Fucking the Brave New World shit. But yeah.
Well, I'm starting to wind down.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of drugs, holy shit, man. This is some strong coffee this morning.
Well, it's not all up to the coffee. It is also the pod acting on us.
The pod has definitely modulated how much I get into a riff.
And it's one more assembly line of thoughts into facts that we've been able to make for ourselves, and that an esteemed lineage of other people have allowed us to stand on their shoulders to help us do this thing.
Well, something you said in the very beginning, I can't remember if this was before we started recording or not, but you said like we'll have to get into my tirade about the Akashic Records things. And I had this thought like, what an age we live in that we can revisit tirades. Because before writing, obviously, unless you were like a king and there was like a jester that just followed you around and like memorized your tirades to repeat them because you were so great, unless you had one of those guys, there was no revisiting tirades. You were just there. If there was a tirade happening, you got to see, there was like live music. The tirade happened, and there were people who witnessed it, and it was wild. But then, then you're like, okay. So, yeah, of course, there's been writing for a very long time. Yes, but who's doing the writing? And what state of mind are they in when they're doing it? You probably had to sit down and carefully do it, and that's why, texts from, like, the 1800s are so ponderous and have, like, 60 semicolons, and, like, you can just imagine a guy, like, puffing on a pipe and, like, just this very deliberate kind of, there isn't like, it's not like this punchy thing. This punchy kind of writing didn't come until you have like, like a slightly drunk like Hemingway, just typing short sentences, just, So then like now it's just, we can make tirades, you can be stoned and pull out your iPhone and just, and then like, okay, that's in the Akashic Records. And then we can, then we can have like this whole, isn't that crazy? That's changing reality right there. The kind of writing that we can, those tirades can persist. Yeah, it's
good. It's good. And it's good, and it's a slightly better good than before that my tirade was communicated via Signal instead of SMS, and
an encrypted tirade.
And we'll get our pods locked in and our RSS feed locked in at some point, and then that'll be encrypted. And more and more truth, baby.
Truth has an agenda.